Aphorism 191. The old theological problem of faith and knowledge, or more clearly of instinct and reason. That is to say, the question whether, in regard to the evaluation of things, instinct deserves to have more authority than rationality, which wants to evaluate and act according to reasons, according to a why. That is to say, according to utility and fitness for a purpose. This is still that old moral problem, which first appeared in the person of Socrates, and was already dividing the minds of men long before Christianity. Socrates himself, to be sure, had, with taste appropriate to his talent, that of a superior dialectician, initially taken the side of reason. And what indeed did he do all his life long but laugh at the clumsy incapacity of his noble Athenians, who were men of instinct like all noble men, and were never able to supply adequate information about the reasons for their actions? Ultimately, however, in silence and secrecy, he laughed at himself too. He found in himself before his more refined conscience and self-interrogation the same difficulty and incapacity. But why? He exhorted himself, should one therefore abandon the instincts with self-interrogation? One must help both him and the reason to receive their due. One must follow the instincts, but persuade reason to aid them with good arguments. This was the actual falsity of that great ironist, who had so many secrets. He induced his conscience to acquiesce in a sort of self-outwitting. Fundamentally, he had to through the irrational aspect of moral judgment. Plato, more innocent in such things, and without the craftiness of the plebeian, wanted at the expenditure of all his strength, the greatest strength any philosopher has hitherto had to expend, to prove to himself that reason and instinct move of themselves towards one goal, towards the good, towards God. And since Plato, all theologians and philosophers have followed the same path. That is to say, in moral matters, instinct, or as the Christians call it, faith, or as I call it, the herd, has hitherto triumphed. One might have to exclude Descartes, the father of rationalism, and consequently the grandfather of the Revolution, who recognized only the authority of reason. But reason is only an instrument, and Descartes was superficial. Aphorism 192. He who has followed the history of an individual science will find in its evolution a clue to the comprehension of the oldest and most common presses of all knowledge and understanding. In both cases, it is the premature hypotheses, the fictions, the good, stupid will to believe, the lack of mistrust and patience which are evolved first. It is only late and then imperfectly that our senses learn to be subtle, faithful, and cautious, while at the same time becoming organs of understanding. It is more comfortable for our eye to react to a particular object by producing good again and again in an image it has often produced before, than by retaining that this new and different in an impression. It later requires more strength, more morality. To hear something new is hard and painful for the ear. We hear the music of foreigners badly. When we hear a foreign language, we involuntarily attempt to form the sounds we hear into words which have a more familiar and homely ring. Thus the Germans, for example, once heard a Krippolasta and adopted it into the Armbrust. The novel finds our senses, too, hostile and reluctant. And even in the case of the simplest processes of the senses, the emotions, such as fear, love, hatred, and the passive emotions of laziness, as little as a reader today reads all the individual words, not to speak of the syllables, of a page, he rather takes about 5 words and 20 haphazardly and conjectures their probable meaning. Just as little do as we see a tree exactly in the entire with its regard to its leaves, branches, color, and shape. It is so much easier for us to put together an approximation of a tree. Even when we are involved in the most uncommon experiences, we still do not do the same. We fabricate the greater part of the experience and can hardly be compelled not to contemplate some even some event as its inventor. All this means we are from the very heart and from the very first accustomed to lying, or to express it more virtuously and hypocritically, in short, more pleasantly. One is much more of an artist than one realizes. In a lively conversation, I often see before me the face of the person with whom I am speaking to so clearly and subtly, determined by the thought he is expressing, or which I believe has been called up in him that this degree of clarity far suppresses the power of my eyesight, so that the play of the muscles and the expression of the eyes must have been invented by me. Probably the person was making a quite different face or none whatever. Aphorism 193. One need more or need one more fewer, and finally are led all along a little in broad daylight, and even in the most cheerful moments of our waking spirit, of the habits of our dreams. Suppose someone has often flown in his dreams, and finally, as soon as he starts dreaming, becomes conscious of a power and art of flying, excuse me, as if it were a privilege or he possessed, likewise as his personal and inevitable form of happiness. Such a man as believes he can realize any arc and angel with the slightest impulse, as it is known, the feeling of a certain divine frivolity, a growing up without tension, or a constraint, a going down without condensation, or abasement without gravity. How should the man who knew such dream experiences and dream habits not find at last that the word happiness had a different color and definition in his waking hours too? How should he not have a different kind of desire for happiness? Soaring rapture, as the poets describe it, must seem in him, in comparison with this flying, too earthly, muscular, violent, to recognize. It is revealed even more in what they regard as actually having and possessing what they find good in regard to a woman, for example. The more modest man counts the simple disposal of her body and sexual gratification as a sufficient and satisfactory sign of having, possessing. Another with a more jealous and demanding thirst for possession sees the question mark, the merely apparent quality of such having, and requires subtler tests. Above all, in order to know whether the woman not only gives herself to him, but also gives up for his sake what she has or would like to have, only thus does she count to him as possessed. A third, however, is not done with jealousy and desire for having the even then he asks himself whether then woman who gives up everything for him, she does not perhaps do so for a phantom of him. He demands that he know him in the sense that every heart before she is able to love him at all. He dares to let himself be unraveled. He feels that his beloved is fully in possession only when she no longer deceives herself about him, but loves him as much for his devilry and hidden insatiability as she does for his goodness, patience, and spirituality. One could like to possess a people and all the higher arts of the Calectristio and Catiline seem to him right for that end. Another, with a more refined thirst for possession, says to himself, one may not deceive where one wants to possess. He is irritated and dissatisfied at the idea that it is a mask of which he rules the hearts of the people. So I must let myself be known, for first of all, know myself. Among helpful and charitable people, one also must realize that it finds that the clumsy deceitfulness which first adjusts and adapts him who is to be helped, as if, for example, he desired precisely their help, and would provide profoundly, gratefully, and faithfully to the submissiveness to them in return for all the help he had received. With these imaginations, they dispose of those in need as if they were possessions, and are charitable and helpful at all only from a desire for possessions. They are jealous if one frustrates or anticipates them when they want to help. Parents involuntarily make of their child something similar to themselves. They call it education, and at bottom of their heart no woman doubts that in their child she has bore a piece of property. No father disputes his right to subject it to his concepts and values. Indeed, in former times, among the ancient Germans, for instance, it seemed proper for fathers to possess power of life or death over the newborn and to use it as if it fit them well. And as formerly the father who's still today the teacher, the class, the priest, the prince, unhesitantly see in every new human being an opportunity for a new position from which it follows. Aphorism 195. The Jews, a people born for slavery, as Tacitus and the whole ancient world says, the chosen people, as they themselves saw and believed. The Jews achieved that miracle of inversion of values, thanks to which life on earth has for a couple of millennia acquired a new and dangerous fascination. The prophets fused rich, godless, evil, violent, sensual into one, and were the first to coin the word world as a term of infamy. It is in this inversion of values with which is involved the employment of the word for poor as a synonym of holy and friend, that the significance of the Jewish people resides with them. There begins the slave revolt in morality. Aphorism 196. It is to be inferred that there exist countless dark bodies close to the sun, such as we shall never see. This is, between ourselves, a parable, and a moral psychologist reads the whole starry script only as a parable and sign language, by means of which many things can be kept secret. Aphorism 97. One altogether misunderstands the beast of prey and man of prey. Caesar Borgia, for example. One misunderstands nature as long as one looks for something sick at the bottom of this healthiest of all tropical monsters and growths, or even for the inborn hell in them, as virtually all moralists have done hitherto. It seems that it does not exist in moralists as hatred for the jungle and for the tropics, and that the tropical man has to be discredited at any cost, whether as the sickness and degeneration of man, or as his own hell and self-torment. But why? For the benefit of temperate zones, the benefit of temperate men, of the moral, of the mediocre. This for the chapter Morality as Timidity. Welcome, everyone. And pardon me for not uploading. Yesterday, I was occupied with myself and family. And excuse my eyes for appearing as red. I was smoking a cigar with my best friends earlier today. It was a magnificent size cigar with a friendly smell, taste. It was sweet, albeit mild, from Costa Rica. So, to discipline myself, it's a double shot of literature of today. In the sense, Nietzschean literature. And we're almost to the conclusion of this part, because we stopped at 180, 197, 6 left, and they're prolonged and lengthy. So it would be prolonged till we finish this part. But we begin first with a great first sentence that Nietzsche still has a problem, perpetually, with theologians and their terms with faith and knowledge. He sees these terms as instinct and reason. Instinct correlate with faith, and reason to knowledge. Why does he say that faith is instinctual and that knowledge is reason? He'll say it here, but he'll say it bluntly in other works. One example, the Antichrist. But here he would say that this became the question of evaluation of things, of the instinct, which deserves more authority than rationality. His elitism here, which wants to evaluate and act according to reason, according to a why in life. And he'll say later in this aphorism of Descartes, that Descartes was superficial, but because of his superficiality, he became the father of rationalism. and the grandfather of the revolution, the French Revolution. But this posits a concern with people reading Nietzsche. He says valuation, he says instinct, but he says authority, but he says rationality. What does he mean? The evaluation in this sense is revaluing the instincts in the form of faith, the reason in the form of knowledge. For religious and non-religious people, you would say, oh, I would act, for the religious people first, you would act in accordance to my faith. Nietzsche would say, you're not acting to your faith, you're acting to your instincts, where you don't possess a lack of knowledge or reason, but you're using mediocre truth in the sense of, and he says this in the Antichrist too, in the sense of you prefer the brain to bronze, or rationality to authority. He says in Thus Spoke Zarathustra that there's more wisdom in your body than your greatest philosophy. He's correct in saying that the instinct controls and develops one's personal philosophy or beliefs, and why he prefers to say have faith inside ourselves, or have the instincts and authority inside ourselves, contra to the dependency, if I can stop stuttering, the dependency of rationality and dialects. And which segues us to his criticism of Socrates again. That this old moral problem, which first appeared as the person of Socrates in Twilight the Idols and The Birth of Tragedy, he has love and animosity relationship with Socrates. He says that Socrates is ugly, so he's a plebeian because he's physically ugly. But because of the Athenians' weak mentality, he capitalized on their beauty with ugliness. Thus began the revaluation of values at the beginning of ancient Greece, which slowly transitioned to Christianity. It was already dividing the man's mind long before Christianity. The man himself, Socrates, had this taste, this talent of a superior dialectician. And because of this superior dialects in Socrates began the ignorant reign of atheists. Atheists love to posit this abstract truth in comparison to the bad Christian who believes in the bad God, which results in a peculiar conclusion of, why are you saying that they're bad? Are you saying that you're the true good and that what they thought was the true good is now seen as the true bad in your eyes? What are you doing here, you atheist? Which Nietzsche would say, they're not atheists, they're Christian atheists. Yes, they'll fervently deny the existence of God, but not have evidence for his existence, while at the same time using the principles of piety in some sense, and their piety in this abstract truth. In the abstract truth became this substituted reason. And the reason, Nietzsche does divide it here in the sake of language. He says that the greater truth or reason is the body or authority, and the mediocre and less small reason is rationality, aka the mind, or the spirit. If you translate Geist from German, it's either spirit or mind. In this comprehensive sense, we'll use mind. So now dialects, reason, evidence, truth are the superior number one values. Nietzsche saw these values as inferior, secondary, or an afterthought, and the primary values were nobility, instinct, strength, laughter, dance, comedy, tragedy. Everything associated with ancient Greece, the time of the Roman Empire, to Napoleon, and the Renaissance. Yes, I incorrectly said the historical order of events, but once he saw an extraordinary culture and extraordinary men, he realized that those are noble, superior values. That's his elitism in the form of his grand politics, of revaluing everything that was valued now, to his personal concern of the utility and fitness of these values that are valueless, but because of humans' abilities to value, they became the superior and number one goal of people's life. So now, while saying that, I said everything of that it was his lifelong desire to have these clumsy, incapacitated, noble Athenians who were saturated with nobility and instincts and vitality, to have adequate information of their reasons for actions. People would agree, people would disagree, aka you hardcore Nietzscheans. You would disagree with this. Well, no, you would agree, but the people who would disagree, me included, of me included in the sense of Socrates saw an issue that, oh, they're flaunting words, but you're not acting in accordance to your words. But he began this 180 process of favoring free will, reason, etc., etc. But behold, however, in silence and secrecy, he laughed at himself. He found this as a more refined conscious and self-interrogation, pronounce the word, self-integration, aka interrogating himself. At the same time, it became the difficulty and his incapacity. So, to say simply, he was neglecting his instincts for some abstract, lethal, and unnecessarily painful form of philosophy. But it suited him before it became a global phenomenon. And that's where Nietzsche begins his concern. These instincts, they were bedridden once the time reason came along with good arguments. The falsity of this great ironist has the secrets which induce the conscious to acquiesce and become outwitted. Fundamentally, it became a irrational part of moral judgment. And then he criticizes Plato here as someone who's more innocent, but without the innocent in such things, and without the craftiness of the plebeians because of the Platonic noble mindset, which still correlates and ties with plebeian aspects of life, wanted the expenditure of all his strength. The strength of any philosopher has been expended its expenditure hitherto. What am I saying here? Sometimes I don't remember the sentences that I form in my head. So Plato is expending this the strength of expenditure to the masses, which Nietzsche would say has happened hitherto, aka before his time, while at the same time proving himself that the instincts will move aside for this one goal, this one good, this one God, and that Plato has influenced every theologian and philosopher then who became at this same path, and now that Christians have called this moral instinct their faith. And Nietzsche said, I don't call it the faith, I call it the hurt. And that's everything of 191. 192. It's prolonged, but a great simplification, or some simplification of it, is that he's discussing lying or lies. One example, I'll say it after drinking this. He has this great hypothesis of that it's inherent and inseparable for humans to lie. Why is that? One example is for entertainment. Another one is for soft teasing and passive lies. He says those are metaphors. But he says at the same time that it's a human it's quoting him, a human condition of the inherent part of human existence that humans create and thrive from illusions, falsehoods, for necessary survival. And due to necessary survival, the social construct of truth is merely set upon sign languages of the emotions, which is agreed upon from society. This absolutist moral maxims then created the facility which we call society. He's correct them on that. He has another witful jab at his Germans, which in Ecce Homo, he disassociates himself from Germans and said, oh, I'm from Polish descent. And in reality, he wasn't from Polish descent. Nietzsche, you hypocrite. At the same time, that's an expression of an unfinished philosophy. And he says here, in both cases, it is premature hypotheses, the fictions, the good, stupid will to believe it's only late, too late, that the lack of mistrust and patience which have evolved first. He says this in the sense of the history of morals, but the individual science which evolved the comprehension or the Occam razor's form of morals, which became the common, to quote him, common process of all knowledge and understanding. Occam's razor is to simplify every unknown, fearful description that occurs in an event or in one's life to a simplistic explanation. And Nietzsche's not a keen person with explanations. And he says this in the Joyful Science too. We'll arrive at the Joyful Science. Be patient, everybody. But with this, that these lies is inherent and inseparable to human existence, and it became a social construct, he realizes, and I do too, that it evolved to unconscious lies and an intellectual dishonesty. It begins with the unconscious lies of people not conscious blatantly, of lying to themselves internally, which became this falsehood of truths. To say simply, what you were told in childhood and through your entire life was these lies of bolstering your confidence or your pride and became this laissez aller, a French term for unchecked freedom that we've said last time. But while not clarifying or humbling oneself of these lies that became truths in society, it slowly became this intellectual pride and dishonesty to oneself, where they deceive themselves and others from presenting their emotional, subjective views, which became objective truths. And he associates this with the simplest, that's the intellectual dishonesty and unconscious lies. And he gives a hysterical, I think this is hysterical, quick view of trees, where he says that in 20 words, he says he rather takes about 5 words and 20 haphazardly in conjunctures to probable meaning. AKA what he's saying here is that the individual words, not as the syllables themselves, the philosopher loves to not use 5 words to explain, or contradicting myself what I said earlier, 5 words to describe his philosophy, but 20 plus words in a haphazard and conjuncture fashion. And he says, why not just a little tree? Exactly and entirely this. And Nietzsche witfully rebukes the 20-word explanation, not explanation, the 20-word description of a tree as, oh, it has leaves, it has branches, it has color, and it has shape, which is much more easier for us to put together an approximation of a tree. But what about the color? What about the shape? What about the branches? What about the leaves? And Nietzsche would say, who's unconcerned at that? It appears to me that you've instilled, no, that that you willingly ascribed value to these frivolous attributes to what a tree is versus what the layman terms are. And this is where he begins to say, this is the custom of lying, where the inventor so hardly compel to not contemplate the experience as a greater fabrication to something most uncommon. AKA, that's simply saying he's lying there, where this inventor of the 20 words that he said became this extraordinary experience that nobody has had, but because of the Occam's razor description I said earlier, they begin to fabricate more and more of their experience, which Nietzsche would say in this next part, that being called up in him, that this degree of clarity far surpasses the power of my eyesight, so that the play of the muscles, the expression of the eyes, must have been invented by me. Probably the person was making a quite different face, or none whatever. Hysterical of Nietzsche. Before we continue forward, how's your day? Mine? Great. The next aphorism is discussing of dreams. Before Beyond Good and Evil, he discussed dreams once, and his perspective of dreams. And it was in Human All Too Human. And I have a section on my laptop where he discusses dreams in Human All Too Human. But before I began discussing of the Human All Too Human version of how we saw dreams, he says here that if we experience it often, it is in the end just as much a part of the total economy of our soul as if anything we really experience. We are by virtue of it rich or poor, when like feel one need more or one need fewer, play on words, let alone a little in broad daylight, and even in the most cheerful moments of our waking spirit, by the habits of our dreams. Suppose someone has often flown in his dreams, and finally, as soon as he starts dreaming, becomes conscious of a power and art to fly, as if it were a privilege he possessed, likewise as his personal and inevitable form of happiness. Then he realizes the arc and angle of the slightest impulse, as known as a feeling, of a certain divine frivolity. It's frivolous, but with not the NESS. It's the frivolity, a giving up without tension or constraint of going, without condensation or abasement, without gravity. To decipher his lyrical connotation here, he's describing of sacrifice, or if an individual has this impulse of not seeking happiness, but this source of power which is generating this joy. He's saying, why not why not use this, what people would see as divine frivolousness there, I'll use that word. Why not have this heightened going up, but because how people see this as a triviality, they don't have the confidence of going down from this abasement and condensation, or having this form of liquid guilt without gravity, aka shooting for the distant target. And this is what Nietzsche thought in Dreams in Beyond Good and Evil, but this is what he said in Human All Too Human. First I'll drink water. Quote, "In the dream we have the source of all metaphysic. Without the dream, men would never have been incited to an analysis of the world. Even the distinction between soul and body is wholly due to the primitive concept of the dream, as also the hypothesis of the embodied soul. Hence the development of all superstition, and also probably the belief in God. So reasoned mankind at one time, and throughout many thousands of years." This is an intriguing hypothesis of Nietzsche of sleep, where he interprets it as a evolutionary time machine, which intrigued me because I'm familiar with Jung and Freud's interpretation of sleep/dreams. He says this is a portal of a primitive past of our ascending and developing senses and instincts. But while at the same time he illustrates and paints the sleeping brain as using the Occam's razor of seeking the simplistic description of our daily puzzledness or confusions. And to quote Nietzsche again, this, however, became the superstition and religious mythos of the function of the brain which most encroached upon it, the slumber in the form of memory. Not it is only that not that it is wholly suspended, but it is reduced to a state of imperfection, as in the primitive ages of mankind, was probably the case with everyone, whether waking or sleeping. AKA he's realizing this inadequacy among the flaw and idiocy that involves of this inadequacy. The idiocy is the simplistic description, but the flaw is continuing that utilitarian approach and doctrine, which evolves this which evolved the creation of superstition and the religious mythos, as some people say. I say mythos because it pictured the hallucinatory experience of a person to have extraordinary but vivid visions of entire communities and nations laboring simultaneously under this one source of superstition or religiosity. And that itself, and to quote him, "Therefore, in sleep and in dream, we make the pilgrimage of every man of earth," fascinates me. That among our dreams, we inevitably succumbed not to the simplicity of them, but by comparing the imperfection with the perfection of the imperfection and perfection, while developing our senses and instincts, which justifies what he was saying earlier of faith. In 194, he's the describing he's describing the lack of fathership in or fatherhood in the realm of love in the later part. But in the early to middle part of Aphorism 194, he's describing love and greed as two separate words with the same definition. In that sense, there's a video named Nietzsche's critique of feminism and equality. Watch that, and what I said here, they'll tie to one another. Now we're entering three great aphorisms. 195. He's discussing the Jews. He quotes Tacitus, a Roman historian and senator, as they were born for slavery. That was the elitist mindset. Same with Nietzsche in the elitist mentality of correct. They on a value judgment level, they're continuing the slave work. But he's not anti-Semitic. He's anti-Semitic, and he's opposed to racial discrimination. But he has this criticism of the Jews that they inverted the moralities of the pre-moral era, which now becomes the millennia moral era, and the fascination of that their form of rich, godless, evil, violent, sensual was first to be coined the world, or the word world, as a term of infamy, aka denouncing this world for an afterlife. So this inversion of values, everything from the word poor became synonymous with holy and kingship. Not king, but kinship. We'll be discussing this aphorism with this specific part of the aphorism in Genealogy of Morals. That the significance of the Jewish people resides with them. There begins the slave revolt in morality. You'll hear that again. In 96, he's poetical. He says that the parable of moral psychologists read parables and sign language as secrecy. One example, he's not a moral psychologist, but Isaac Newton, he thought there was intrinsic secrets in the Bible. And I correlate that with this as the existence of countless dark bodies choose or are close to the sun, such as we shall never see. But in this sense, this parable is, why are dark bodies close to the sun? It correlates with the dark attributes of our dark but malicious and violent attributes of our instincts, and that we're 100 times nearer to the sun, or to, in this sense, the sun is symbolic to values. This ties with a short quote that he said in part 4, Maxims and Interludes, where I'm paraphrasing that the great events that occurred in human history is the times that we have rebaptized the evil qualities of our life, which became the excellent qualities of our wealth. Tie that to this aphorism. And the final one, he's discussing the misinterpretations of the beast of prey and the man of the beast. People, or the man of prey, not the man of beast. The man of prey, people associate that, as he would say, Sciorzi Borgia, which is the son of Pope Alexander. Well, at the same time, they misinterpret this nature as something sick. And at the bottom, that the healthiest of all tropical monsters and growths, Borgia, in their eyes, have the inbred bornhood of, or the inbred born nature, couldn't think of the word earlier, of hell in their eye. Virtually in all the moralists, they have interpreted this with Borgia, but outside of Borgia, the beast of prey. And this is his, okay, I was observing this, but after that he questions why are the moderate climates or temperate climates becoming temperate and civilized men. This misinterpretation of the beast of prey, man of beast, or the man of prey, he has this same distinction in Genealogy of Morals, which will vividly describe and vividly decipher and define there. But while we're present with Beyond Good and Evil, I'll scrupulously say that he saw Borgia as the beast of prey, and the lion, and the man of prey as lambs. And if you're educated in Renaissance history, Borgia was a malevolent, but his benevolence propelled human society forward. Appreciate everything for today, and I appreciate my best friends who invited me to smoke a cigar with them. There's a link in the description to the Men's Academy. Amor Fati. Love your faith.